Welcome to today's episode of Pharma Newsroom, your easy insights into all the biggest pharma companies in the world. We thank today's sponsor, Pharma AI Academy, your education partner for pharma.
Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, let's jump right in. Novo Nordisk just put out their first quarter 2025 financials, and honestly, the top-line growth really catches the eye.
It really does.
We're seeing a 19% sales increase in Danish kroner. That's 18% at constant exchange rates, hitting DKK 78.1 billion.
Yeah, and when you see numbers like that from a major player, well, it makes you stop and think, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're considering it from an investment angle.
Exactly. You start wondering, what's behind this and what does it signal for the future?
Precisely. And Novo Nordisk, well, they're not exactly new. They're a huge global healthcare company famous for diabetes care for ages and now increasingly obesity care. Plus, they have their rare disease segment.
Right. So this Q1 report, it landed May 7th, 2025. It's really our window into how things are going right now.
It is. It's our chance to, dig into the details, see what's working, what maybe isn't, and get a feel for their path for the rest of the year.
So think of this as your quick guide through the report. We're going to pull out the key financial highlights, the main growth drivers, really give you a clearer picture if Novo Nordisk is on your radar for stock considerations.
Our mission here is basically to break down this Q1 performance and their outlook so you can get a better handle on their current market position and, well, where they might be headed.
Okay, let's unpack it. That overall sales growth, 18-19%, it's definitely the headline. But what's really powering it underneath?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, 19% reported growth, 18% CER, DKK, 78.1 billion. That's solid.
Definitely solid.
And profitability looks good, too. Operating profit up 22% reported, 20% CER, hitting DKK 38.8 billion. Net profit, DKK 29 billion, that's a 14% increase.
Those earnings per share.
Diluted EPS up 15% to DKK 6.53. So the overall financial health seems strong. But yeah, let's drill down into the segments.
Right, because when you look at the different parts of the business, the story gets, well, much clearer. Diabetes and obesity care, their core jumped 21% reported, 19% CER to DKK 73.5 billion.
Huge numbers.
But really feels like the obesity side is where the fireworks are happening.
Absolutely. I mean, their obesity care segment, a staggering 67% growth reported, 65% at constant rates. That's DKK 18.4 billion just in Q1.
Wow. And Wegovy.
That's the star. Sales shot up 85% reported, 83% CER, bringing in DKK 17.4 billion on its own.
Incredible.
And get this context. The whole global market for these branded obesity treatments grew 135% in volume. Novo Nordisk has almost 69% of that market share.
69%. That's dominance.
It is. It's market dominance in a market that's exploding. For anyone looking at this from an investment perspective, that kind of grip is, well, very noteworthy.
It certainly is. But the report also flags the impact of compounded GLP-1s in the U.S. What does that mean, practically, if you're thinking about the stock?
Right. That's a really critical piece for potential investors. While obesity care is booming, especially Wegovy, the U.S. market has this specific challenge. Compounding is where pharmacies make custom versions of drugs. And we're seeing a lot of compounded GLP-1s popping up in the U.S. This directly competes with Novo's branded drugs like Wegovy and Ozempic, affecting, market share and potentially pricing.
Okay, so a booming segment, but a specific headwind in a major market.
Yeah.
Got it. What about their other big hitter, GLP-1 diabetes care? How did that look?
GLP-1 diabetes also grew, just not quite at that same breakneck pace. Sales were up 13% reported, 11% CER, reaching DKK 39.6 billion.
Still pretty strong growth.
Definitely. Ozempic is the main product there, up 18% reported, 15% CER. And globally, GLP-1s are taking a bigger slice of the diabetes prescription pie, about 6.8% now.
And Novo's share of that?
They hold a hefty 54% value share of that global GLP-1 market. So even with the U.S. compounding issue, the diabetes GLP-1 business is still a really strong growing base worldwide.
Makes sense. What about their older insulin business? Is that still a big factor?
Yeah, insulin is still a significant revenue stream. It grew 4% reported, 3% CER to DKK 15.0 billion.
So slower growth there.
Much slower. The report mentions different growth rates for different insulins and regions. It suggests, a more mature market. Growth is incremental, not exponential like the GLP-1s. But for an investor, it adds a layer of stability, right, alongside the high growth stuff.
Good point. Okay, moving on to their smaller rare disease segment. How did that fare in Q1?
Rare disease saw more modest growth, 5% reported, 3% CER, bringing in DKK 4.6 billion overall.
Okay.
But interestingly, within that, rare endocrine disorders did much better, up 18% reported, 14% CER.
So there's strength within the segment.
Exactly. Suggests there are pockets of strong performance worth keeping an eye on for future potential, even if the overall segment growth is slower.
Okay, so we've looked at what they sell. What about where? How did the geography break down?
Yeah, the geographical split is revealing. U.S. operations had solid growth, 20% reported, 17% CER, reaching DKK 44.3 billion.
And within the U.S.?
Well, like we discussed, obesity care was up a huge 40% CER. GLP-1 diabetes grew 10% CER. So strong demand in the U.S., even with those compounding pressures we talked about.
All right. And outside the U.S., international operations?
Also very strong, up 18% reported, 19% CR to DKK 33.8 billion. And here, obesity care growth was even more dramatic, 137% CER.
Wow, 137%.
Yeah. GLP-1 diabetes was up 13% CER internationally, too. If you break it down, Wegovy is a big driver in Europe, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. That's their UCAN region, but also emerging markets and Asia Pacific.
And China.
China saw 22% CER growth, driven by both Ozempic and Wegovy. So it really paints a picture of broad global adoption of these key drugs.
Okay, now thinking longer term, the pipeline is always crucial for a pharma stock. What jumped out from their R&D update?
The R&D section definitely has some highlights worth noting for potential investors. Cagrisema, that's their combination drug, showed really impressive weight loss in a trial, 15.7%.
15.7%, that's significant.
They're hoping for first regulatory approval in Q1 2026. That could be another massive growth driver in obesity, potentially even better than what they have now.
A potential game changer then. What else?
Well, they submitted an oral version of semaglutide at a 25 milligram dose for obesity to the FDA in the U.S. An oral option could be huge for convenience and market expansion.
Definitely. Easier than injections.
Exactly. And they also submitted their weekly semaglutide, the 2.4 milligram dose, for MSH. That's that liver disease, metabolic dysfunction-associated steatohepatitis.
Right. MSH is a big area of unmet need.
Huge. They submitted in the EU and US and got priority review in the US. Success there would open up a completely new, large market for them.
So, moving beyond diabetes and obesity, any setbacks in R&D, anything dropped?
They did mention stopping a phase 1 trial for a different once-weekly oral semaglutide, said it was due to portfolio considerations.
Which happens.
Totally normal in pharma R&D, you have to place your bets. But on the plus side, they also submitted Icosema, that's their weekly insulin GLP-1 combo, for approval in Japan.
Okay, so lots happening in the pipeline, lots of focus on future innovation. Let's shift to their strategic goals and the challenges they mentioned. They have some clear targets, right?
They do. A big one is getting over a third of the global diabetes value market share. They're close, 33.3%, but actually dipped slightly, 0.6 percentage points.
Interesting.
A more immediate goal is hitting over DKK 25 billion in obesity care sales for the full year 2025. Given they did DKK 18.4 billion in Q1 alone, and that's 65% CER growth. Well, they look well on track for that.
Seems likely.
And they also want to keep growth going in rare disease, which was up 3% CER in Q1.
And that challenge we keep coming back to, the lower than hoped for branded GLP-1 uptake in the U.S. because of the compounding issue, how are they actually fighting that?
Yeah, that's a key strategic battleground and something investors really need to watch. They're hitting it from multiple angles. Legally, they're going after what they see as unlawful compounding.
Okay.
And they're trying to improve access to the real deal through things like their NovoCare pharmacy, partnerships with telehealth companies, and getting Wegovy onto more insurance formularies like the recent CVS win.
So a full court press, basically.
Absolutely. It shows they're taking it very seriously and are willing to invest to protect that market share.
Right. Now, looking forward, they updated their financial outlook for 2025. What are the key changes investors need to know?
Yes, the guidance was revised. They now expect sales growth at CER to be between 13% and 21%. That's down from the 16-24% range they gave before.
Okay, a noticeable trim.
Yeah. And they also noted that reported growth will likely be about 3 percentage points lower than CER, mostly due to currency headwinds.
And operating profit.
Similar story. Operating profit growth at CER is now forecast at 16-24%, down from 19-27%, and reported growth expected maybe 5 points lower than CER.
So what's driving these downward revisions?
It really comes down to two main things they cited. First, that lower-than-expected uptake of their branded GLP-1s in the U.S., thanks to the compounded competition. And second, unfavorable foreign exchange rates, especially the U.S. dollar weakening against the Danish krone.
Okay, so U.S. market realities and currency issues are tempering the outlook a bit. Any other big shifts in the financial forecast?
Well, interestingly, their outlook for net financial items swung quite dramatically. They now expect a gain of around DKK 0.9 billion, whereas before they expected a loss of about DKK 9 billion.
That's a big swing.
It is. Capital expenditure, though, that's unchanged. Still planning around DKK 65 billion for property, plant, and equipment, which shows they're still investing heavily in manufacturing capacity.
Makes sense with the demand.
But linked to the lower sales growth forecast, their free cash flow projection, excluding M&A, is now lower too, between DKK 56 and 66 billion, down from DKK 75-85 billion previously.
Okay, so growth still expected, but maybe at a slightly less intense pace, impacting cash flow. How are they planning to use their capital?
The strategy there seems consistent. Focuses on internal growth investments, building factories basically to make more of these high-demand drugs.
Right.
They also plan to keep paying out about 50% of net profit as dividends, returning cash to shareholders. But notably, no active share buyback program right now, even though they have authorization.
Prioritizing reinvestment in the business.
Seems that way. Makes sense given the growth opportunities and the need to scale up production.
Okay. Beyond the core financials, the report touched on sustainability. Any quick highlights there?
Yeah, a few points. Their overall CO2 emissions were up 37% across scopes 1, 2, and 3. They attributed a big chunk of that to the Catalent acquisition, which is a major manufacturing partner.
Okay.
On the social side, they highlighted treating 43.1 million people with diabetes and 2.6 million with obesity. And women in senior leadership ticked up slightly to 42%.
Got it. And any other deals or partnerships, business development stuff investors should know about?
Yeah, they were active there too. They licensed in a potential triple agonist drug, UDT-251, that hits GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon receptors, involved in upfront payment and future milestones.
Interesting. Adding more to the pipeline externally.
Exactly. And they also licensed LX9851 from Lexicon Pharma, that's an oral small molecule inhibitor, also for obesity and related conditions. Again, upfront payment and potential milestones. So clearly looking outside for innovation too.
Good to know. Finally, there was an update on the legal front regarding drug shortages and compounding. What's the latest development?
The main thing is the FDA took injectable semaglutide off the official drug shortage list back in February.
Okay.
Some compounding pharmacy groups challenged this legally, but a federal court denied their request for injunction in April. This basically meant the FDA's period of, let's call it, looking the other way on compounding ended for certain pharmacies on April 24th and is ending for others on May 22nd.
So less leeway for compounding.
That seems to be the direction. And Novo Nordisk has been actively involved in this legal fight, arguing against the compounding of their patented drugs, saying it's potentially unsafe and unlawful.
Right. Okay. Wow. That was a lot to cover. Let's try and distill it down. For our listeners, maybe acting as their own stock analyst here, what are the absolute key takeaways from this Q1 deep dive if they're looking at Novo Nordisk?
Okay, key takeaways for a potential investor. 1, overall growth is strong, no doubt about it. 2, the obesity care segment is really the engine right now, showing incredible momentum.
Right.
3, GLP-1 diabetes is still growing globally, but faces that specific, significant challenge from compounded drugs in the U.S. market. That's a big one to watch.
Definitely.
4, the R&D pipeline looks promising, with things like CagriSema and oral semaglutide potentially driving future growth. 5, the financial outlook for 2025 was revised down a bit, but still points to pretty significant growth.
Still double-digit growth expected.
Exactly. And finally, their strategy is clearly focused on leading in diabetes and absolutely capitalizing on this massive obesity market opportunity.
That's a great summary. What's maybe the aha moment or the central tension investors should really grapple with here?
I think the core tension, the real aha, is that stark contrast, right? You've got this absolutely explosive growth in obesity care where they are dominant, but then you have these real headwinds in the crucial U.S. GLP-1 market because of compounding.
How do those two balance out?
Exactly. How effectively can they navigate that U.S. pressure while still riding the global obesity wave? That's the key question. And layered on top of that, the potential in their R&D pipeline, that's the other big factor pointing towards future potential.
So for you, the listener, evaluating the stock, how should you apply all this information?
You really need to weigh that amazing obesity growth and the pipeline potential against those U.S. market challenges and the slightly lowered financial forecast. Look at the geographical performance. Where are they strongest? Where are the challenges?
Right.
Keep a very close eye on their R&D milestones. Does CagriSema deliver? Does oral semaglutide get approved? And definitely track any news on the regulatory front or the competitive landscape around those compounded GLP-1s. All these pieces influence the investment case.
Okay, makes sense. So finally, let's leave you with a thought to chew on. We have this global obesity epidemic. Novo Nordisk is the clear leader with a strong pipeline. But we also have these U.S. market issues, currency fluctuations, and questions about just how long this incredible growth rate can last.
Right. So the question for you is, how sustainable is this trajectory? What do you see as the biggest risks and opportunities ahead for Novo Nordisk and its shareholders? It's definitely worth digging into their actual filings and keeping tabs on the market to form your own view.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Novo Nordisk's Q1.